Most people think there's just one kind of dangerous personality to watch out for. There isn't. Psychologists have identified 3, and they don't always look the way you'd expect. One charms you, one calculates you, one simply doesn't care what happens to you at all. Understanding the difference between them could be the single most useful thing you learn this year. In 2002, researchers Delroy, Paulhus, and Kevin Williams coined a term that's since become one of the most studied concepts in personality psychology: the Dark Triad. It refers to 3 overlapping but distinct traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. But here is the important detail most people miss. These aren't necessarily mental illnesses. They exist on a spectrum in the general population, at what researchers call a subclinical level, which means someone in your life right now could carry these traits without ever being formally diagnosed with anything. The first type is the one most people have already heard of. Narcissism is defined by grandiosity, an excessive need for admiration, and a profound lack of empathy. But here's what separates it from the other 2. Narcissists are deeply invested in how they're seen. They want the spotlight. They want to be envied, admired, validated. This actually makes them somewhat easier to identify because their behavior is loud.
They dominate conversations. They can't tolerate criticism. They surround themselves with people who reflect their greatness back at them. Researchers note something interesting here too. Narcissism is sometimes associated with relatively higher well-being for the narcissist themselves, even while causing real, documented damage to everyone around them. But don't worry. If you have watched my previous videos, you already know exactly how to defeat them. The second type is quieter and arguably more dangerous because it's harder to spot. Machiavellianism. Named after the 16th century political philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli, it describes someone defined by manipulation, indifference to morality, and a calculated focus on self-interest. The key word here is calculated. Unlike the narcissist, a Machiavellian doesn't need the spotlight. They're comfortable working in the background, playing a long game, building leverage quietly. They don't lash out impulsively. They plan. They'll happily let someone else take credit if it serves a bigger goal later. This is the personality type most associated with calculated office politics, long-term manipulation, and people who seem perfectly reasonable right up until you realize how much they've been controlling the situation the whole time.
The third type is the one researchers consider the most severe: psychopathy. It is marked by continuous antisocial behavior, impulsivity, and what's specifically called callous and unemotional traits. Most researchers consider this the darkest of the 3 because the damage tends to be the most severe and the least restrained. Unlike narcissism or Machiavellianism, psychopathy isn't really about ego or strategy. It's about a fundamental disconnect, an inability to feel empathy or remorse in the way most people do.
This is also the trait most closely linked, in its extreme clinical form, to antisocial personality disorder. But here is an important nuance. Most people with psychopathic traits are not violent criminals. Many simply move through relationships and workplaces, causing quiet, repeated harm, with little to no visible guilt.
Here's where the research gets genuinely fascinating. Studies measuring personality traits have found that all three types share exactly one consistent thread: low agreeableness. In simple terms, a reduced capacity or willingness to be cooperative, warm, or compassionate toward others. Everything else differs. Narcissists crave attention. Machiavellians crave control. Psychopaths often crave neither. They're simply indifferent. But underneath all three, that same root trait is doing the damage. An unwillingness to consider you as someone whose feelings matter as much as their own goals.
This is the question almost everyone asks eventually, and the honest, research-based answer is complicated. Some evidence suggests narcissistic traits can soften somewhat, often after a major failure or loss that cracks the grandiose self-image. Machiavellian behavior may shift only when manipulation stops being useful to them, which is strategic adaptation, not real change. Psychopathic traits are considered the most resistant to change of the three. The bigger point clinicians emphasize: real change requires the person to want it, recognize it, and sustain effort over time. You cannot do that work for them, ever. The goal of knowing this isn't to diagnose everyone around you. It's protection. Once you can recognize which version of this you're dealing with, the one who needs applause, the one playing chess, or the one who simply doesn't care, you stop being confused by their behavior. And confusion is exactly where they want you. If this helped you understand someone in your life, subscribe, because next we're looking at the exact early warning signs that show up in the first few weeks of meeting someone like this, before you're in too deep to see it clearly. See you in the next one.